Saeed's always really good for the ego. If you guys want to get the actual scoop, you can ask Marie for all the dirty details.
That's the truth.
So here's me. My primary appointment is in informatics, and as Saeed noted, I also have appointments in education and pediatrics, and that's because a lot of the work that I do involves kids and thinking about their health and education and wellness. If I were on Facebook, you would learn about me that I have 2 little kiddos. That's William and Warner. I have a husband and I have a dog who blogs, although she hasn't really blogged very regularly since I had kids. There seems to be a correlation there. Here's my SURF-IT scholar. Marie doesn't like to have pictures taken of herself, so I have to like steal them from random group shots. That I'll teach her. You guys already know her already. She's an informatics major finishing up this year. She's doing really cool work this summer that I'm super excited about, focused on sharing expertise between industrialized nations and developing nations, particularly for researchers and so on, which is a challenge that we have in doing sort of community-based work. That said, it's totally not what I'm going to talk about today. I am trying something new this year. Normally I come and I try to talk to you guys about the work that my mentee is doing, or at least the things that are closely related to what she's doing. I decided this year that Marie can speak for herself, and I'm going to talk about totally different things so I don't scoop her, so you guys can hear all her good stuff when she gives her presentation. So instead, today, I want to talk to you about the need for technology innovations in autism, and the work that I've been doing in this space over the last more years than I actually care to think about now that I say it. And I also want to give you a sampling of some of the great work happening around the country. This is another one of my attempts to do something new and different. Usually when I come to talk to the SURF-IT scholars, I only tell you about my work, and I've decided I'm bored with listening to myself talk about myself. So I'm going to talk about some of the projects we're doing here at UCI, but also some projects that are going on at other places, so you get some sense of the landscape of autism and technology work, and sort of where I, along with many other people in this area, think the vision for the future is sort of going. And I know at least one of you, I think a couple of you actually participated in the Autism App Jam last year, so you have some thoughts about what this looks like. Okay, so here's what's going on in the autism space. We have massive increases in diagnoses. We also have massive increases in the services that we know actually create positive interventions, particularly in children's lives, but even all through the lifespan of people with autism. And so what you see is like a massive increase in the needed services. But the available services just can't keep pace. So even if we're training as many behavioral therapists as humanly possible, and we're getting as much services out there to people as you can, if you're in a rural environment, you really can't get services. Even in urban environments, though, there's just more people wanting services than there are available. We think more money can fix part of this problem, right? So federal government's dumping a bunch of money into the autism space. We can get more people trained in these programs. We can do a little bit better. If you're wealthy, you can get more services, things like that. But it can't fix the whole thing. And so we hope that technology is actually a space where we can bridge some additional gap there. Matthew Goodwin, a good colleague of mine at Northeastern, has termed this idea autism telemetrics. So the idea here is, I'm just gonna move that. You guys don't need the in and out. The idea here is that if we have technology-enabled behavioral assessment, we can do things that are less obtrusive. So what do you guys think I mean by behavioral assessment? Any ideas? It's exactly what it sounds like. Yes, Marie. I wasn't gonna bug you because you were eating, but you're always, I've had Marie in class. She's like the greatest person to have in class because she will always answer your questions.
So things like twitching and observing behaviors that they're doing in ways that is not, because they're easily distracted. So getting to see them and do things and see what they're, I'm not as articulate today.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. So the thing about autism is this: you can't draw someone's blood, you can't take a urine sample and say this person has autism, right? We need to do assessments of what's going on with their language, what's going on with motor skills, what kinds of behaviors are you seeing, all kinds of things. And that's really challenging. That usually looks like people coming into your home, into your classroom, invading your space, maybe watching toileting routines, watching bedtime routines, doing a whole bunch of very sort of obtrusive measures. And the thought is, well, if we can use sensors, if we can use video recording, if we use audio recording, we can get some of those measures in a way that doesn't involve this really intensive human engagement that can be so problematic. We also see in traditional assessment all kinds of sort of reactivity to what's going on, right? So if you don't want to look me in the eye, and one of my tests is to find out whether or not you want to look me in the eye, and I walk up to you and I'm like, look me in the eye, that's really upsetting, right? There's some reactivity there. You're creating problems where there weren't any. On the other hand, if you can just get video of regular everyday interaction, you're going to find out what eye contact looks like for a particular kid. Ecological validity is a huge problem with behavioral assessment currently. So that means things like, you know, I'm going to ask you to repeat something. Well, I can tell you I have a 2-year-old who's not on the spectrum, and if I ask him to repeat something in a scary doctor's office, he's not going to do it. But if I ask him to repeat something in our house, it's completely fine. And so these kinds of assessments. So you get the idea. The models change over time. We want to be able to provide just-in-time feedback. If you have sensors going on in the home, you can give people feedback immediately as opposed to asking them to collect data on pen and paper over weeks and weeks of time and then giving them an update on what you think they should be doing. So that's the general idea of the ways in which we think that technology can help engage. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I got started in this space. So when I was a grad student, not that much older than you guys are now, I was really obsessed with thinking about record keeping, and in particular healthcare record keeping, because I had experienced a few things in my own health where the doctor sort of said, we don't really know, take this notebook and write down every time you're having the symptom and tell us what else is going on and maybe we'll see if we can figure it out, right? And this is sort of the default for we don't know what's going on, is take a bunch of records. And I was having a conversation with my advisor who had one child diagnosed with autism at the time, and about 6 months later he would have a second child diagnosed. And he said, you want to think about healthcare records, you should see the amount of crap that I have to fill out, right? And he pulls out notebooks and notebooks that clinicians have given him, that the schools have given him, all of these things, and said, we need to do something about the diagnosis and the monitoring and the record keeping in the autism space. So we did a bunch of things. I will blaze through these really quickly. This is stuff I did in grad school. So this project here is called Aberrus. This is about discrete child training. Anybody ever heard of discrete child training? No? All right. There's a lot of controversy in the autism world about discrete child training, so you can look that up later if you want. But the idea here is that you rapidly are asking a child, like, hand me the green cup, hand me the blue cup, and writing down whether or not they performed that independently, if you had to do like hand-over-hand modeling with them, if you had to model it by picking up the cup yourself, things like that. And different therapists get way different scores on this, and we don't know whether it's the therapist isn't able to create the actual behavior, or if the therapist is judging something independent differently than someone else would, and all these different things. So the idea here is that we have video recording tagged to what the therapist is writing down on the pen, and we use special pens so we can automatically get their handwriting into the system, and then you can scrub through the video and watch exactly every trial that was happening. This is the bulk of my dissertation work. This is a system called CareLog, which is all about functional behavior assessment for kids with really severe behaviors in classrooms. So we're usually talking about kids who are injuring themselves, injuring others. And the idea with functional behavior assessment is you want to find out what happened before the behavior as well as what happened after to see if it's being reinforced. This is really hard for teachers to do in classrooms. And so what we did is what you see there is 4 views of the same classroom up in the corner, really tiny cameras so it doesn't sort of create problems for the students, constantly recording in a loop. If the teacher does nothing, it gets deleted. If they choose to hit a little remote, basically looks like your car remote, then we get whatever they've set. So maybe 10 minutes before the button press and 5 minutes after, stitched together in a little 15-minute segment they can go back and analyze later. So that's what that is. This is a really enlarged version of a very small sensor board. This was about trying to detect if people are doing hand flapping, things like this, other kinds of self-stimulatory behaviors automatically, because people are really bad at judging whether or not things like that are going up or down based on, say, a new medication or a new diet. And then Julie Keats, who's a professor at UW, finished out this work with Smart Baby Monitor, really focused on trying to detect developmental milestones so you can bring down the age of diagnosis below 2. Okay, that's the whirlwind of a bunch of stuff that happened like 10 years ago. So, what does this mean for us, right? So we started to think about, we've done a bunch of work now and thinking about what does it mean to capture a bunch of data about kids with autism. And we find out quite happily, automated capture can be successfully applied to this domain. There's a bunch of stuff we can do automatically that doesn't require human intervention that really helps speed up diagnosis and monitoring. We see some infrastructure for sort of defining and dealing with the various capture devices, but basically with some nice sensor fusion, we can make it all work. This looks really similar to other chronic care situations. So what we also see is when you look at elder care, for example, it's a situation in which people are losing independence as opposed to gaining independence, which is what you're looking at with kids with disabilities, but basically the problems are the same. How do we not bother people and not make them feel creeped out, but still get them support that they need and monitor how well they're doing on a daily basis? That being said, turns out, and this is still true now, so we've been doing this work now for a long time, and it turns out that it's still really difficult to do this in a socially appropriate way. Saving only the right data at the right time and not a whole bunch of extraneous stuff that makes people uncomfortable is really challenging. It's very hard to identify what data might be good. Merging the kind of implicit capture that we might get by, monitoring somebody's cup just to make sure how much they're drinking, for example, something that happens implicitly, with something explicit, writing down how many cups of water you're drinking a day. And then the sort of privacy and control, and particularly this is challenging with kids. Because what happens with kids' medical records? Any idea? Thoughts about this?
Parents.
Their parents control them, sure. What happens eventually?
They're destroyed. They become 18 and they get them.
We don't know, right? They become 18. And it's a really big challenge. And in fact, legally, there's a weird little gap where if you're 13 or under, your parents automatically get your medical records. If you're 18 or older, you automatically get them. Between 13 and 18, they're yours, but you are not considered responsible enough to delegate them to someone else. So your parents can't get them, even with your consent, between 13 and 18. It's a huge issue, right? And then the EMR systems don't know how to handle this. No one really knows how to handle this. Educational records are even more complicated. So kids, records, legal stuff, hard. As I said, the educational stuff becomes really challenging. What we see in outcomes-based education, has anyone ever heard this term before? Yes? What do you guys think it is?
It's measured by outcome, performance on exams or something.
Uh-huh. Other thoughts? You can also think of this as No Child Left Behind, right? In America, outcomes-based education was largely implemented in No Child Left Behind. So the idea is that we are going to measure everything, and we are going to give funding and care about people based on the outcomes they're producing. And so this is really about sort of testing what's coming out at the other end. In special education, this turned into individual education plans because we can't measure and test. Well, it's arguable whether we can measure and test anyone according to a standardized rubric, but we do at least recognize that in special education we can't do that. So instead, you get individualized education plans, which look kind of like these. You have this list of goals that you're going to work with this particular kid in this particular year, and then you measure the outcomes at the other end. And so this turns into like, all we want is data. This is all we care about. And there are some really interesting sort of critical scholars who are looking at this and saying, okay, well, when we move into this diagnosis and labeling kind of model, instead of teaching and instead of caring, we're now in this totalizing and regulatory situation in which the teacher is entirely about testing, record keeping, monitoring, and surveillance, and not about teaching. And I fully admit that I have very much contributed to that kind of thing, right? And I still think that that's valuable in certain ways. We need records about progress. That's important for health. But it also raises some questions about what does it mean to do something that's sort of the opposite of this. So more recently, we've been focused on how do we use technology to enable inclusion and empowerment beyond just the potential to measure and monitor. So it's absolutely true that technologies do a great job of measuring and monitoring. They have a role there, but we wanted to think about this other piece. So this meant We keep doing our nice interdisciplinary work, working with all of the sort of adults in this space, teachers, parents, and clinicians, and suddenly we're working with students in the school districts, kids with autism, adults with autism who are transitioning into college, all of these kinds of settings. So we're working with that population as well. And that's been really cool. I'm happy to talk with people about the actual process of doing that another time. I'll give you a quick example of a couple of these. So this project has been going on now for like 6 years. It's this never-ending project that we have. But the idea here is that instead of using the sort of paper-based visual schedules that are so common in classrooms, we can make technology-based ones where you've got here a kid with a tablet whose tablet is interfacing with this large display here, and we can embed all kinds of record keeping. So instead of a teacher walking around and saying like, did you get this answer right? Did I have to take your hand and prompt you? The devices are doing it automatically. We can scaffold the skills over time. So as you get better, the interface automatically adjusts. Any of you who took the SAT know what that looks like. As you need more help, you know, the questions get a little easier, things like that. And here's one of our teachers talking about this.
My name is Karina Morales, and I am the special day class teacher for kids with autism. I teach kids that are 4th through 6th grade, but currently in the summertime I have kids that range from 2nd to 4th grade. And I think it's been amazing. You know, definitely haven't had to worry about setting up the schedules every single day through this process. It was very time consuming. I think the kids are really just learning with it, you know, and like, you know, being able to teach geography or concepts like more or less, you know, stuff that I wasn't able to appeal to them, you know, through other methods, and through the VSCAD I've been able to, you know, make it picture friendly and make it very visual for them to really understand. So I think that's going to be the big change, is that they're going to be able to learn so many new concepts and stuff through this device.
So you can kind of see there, Karina not only is using the devices in the ways that we had expected, but she and the kids are also innovating sort of on the fly and using the devices in a whole variety of ways to support their curriculum. And as I say, that project is ongoing. One of my grad students now and an army of undergrads, I think, are working on porting everything to the Android platform so we can just make it free and available, with the idea being that there will eventually be an online community in which the teachers can actually upload various different lessons so that everybody can share these resources. This is a very common practice amongst elementary school teachers anyway. We're just gonna make it a little more electronic. Okay, so similarly, another project in which we're working with the schools is this a focus on the social compass curriculum, which is a social skills curriculum for teaching things like having good eye contact, proximity, so that means don't be a close talker, basically. How to start an interaction, how to ask questions, these kinds of things. And so this is what the curriculum looks like on paper. The drawings are intentionally rough. We know the people who created the curriculum, and that's an intentional thing. And then this is what it looks like on our devices. So we have essentially augmented reality devices. So these are Android phones that have an overlay on them. So this is a faked picture, obviously, but you get the idea. You're looking through at a picture of your friend. It's giving you a hint to, hey, you guys should sync your devices together. That's what they're doing there, to say that you're starting an interaction. It's going to suggest to you to go look for this kid or that kid who has some ideas, some habits, I guess, that are in common. So you both like to play soccer or something. And I'll show you kind of how that looks for. So, hey, go look for this kid. It's going to encourage you to go find him. Now it tells you you should make eye contact. We actually measure whether or not you've made eye contact. If you both do, then it's going to go on to the next step and tell you, you know, be this distance from each other and so on and so forth. When it's all done, then you get to rate how you think it went. Thumbs up or thumbs down, and if both the kids think that it went well, you're gonna get a little star that says, yay, you know, it went well. What we see in practice, and we did a deployment of this with kids, with 12 kids, a mix of neurotypical and kids with autism. Social missteps, so these are things like not making eye contact, having the wrong proximity, and so on, were reduced to pretty substantially when they're using the devices. We had fewer behavioral issues, so things like rocking, jumping, making noises inappropriately, and so on. We observed 50 of these incidents during the couple of weeks where they were not using the tool, and only one when they were actually using it. We also see more interactions. This is not super surprising because the devices explicitly say, like, hey, go find someone, don't sit in the corner. So we expected that we'd see more interactions. But qualitatively, one of the things that was really interesting is that the students with autism, we observed them actually finding new strategies for creating those interactions. So they started to initiate interactions that they really hadn't done in the past. They started to join groups. They understood the creation and transformation of social groups. These are 4th and 5th graders. 4th and 5th graders, even without autism, struggle with this, sort of understanding the playground politics. And we have them telling us things like, oh, you know, now I get it. You wait till the kid who's in charge invites you into the circle, and then you can talk. And this is something that is developmentally appropriate for them to be learning at this age, but very rare for kids at this age with autism to sort of get that. And then the neurotypical students adopted this mentoring behavior, so they started acting a lot nicer too. So it wasn't just that the kids with autism improved their social skills, we also saw a bunch of improvements with the other kids. Okay, so that was sort of the next paradigm that we were looking at, is thinking about sort of mobile solutions and tablet-based solutions to support you know, kids being involved and integrated into classrooms. And now I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of the vision of where a lot of us are going right now, is moving from this idea of carryable support to actually wearable and environmental support, so that instead of having to carry around your tablet or your assistive technology device and have it look really assistive, now we've got some other options. And also from human directed, so this is really where the technologies are, you know, at the beck and call of the humans, to just human assisted, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. Okay, so from carryable to wearable and environmental. So 2 examples. We just got a bunch of glass devices. Google is very interested in trying to understand how glass can be used as an assistive technology. And so one of the things we're doing is we're transporting all the Mosoko work onto glass. So instead of you having to walk around and like be like, oh, it's telling me to go talk to Marie, now it's gonna pop up on your glass device. You don't look the coolest wearing glass, but I assure you it's less assistive technology looking than holding up your phone. And so this allows also for real-time indicators of what's going on. You don't have to check it, it's just showing you in your peripheral vision and kind of helping you with your conversation. We're also looking at things like algorithms to actually assess anxiety based on eye blink patterns, so that we can intervene when we're seeing that you might be getting anxious. And this is useful not just for kids with autism, but for all kinds of people who might have anxiety and other things. And we think that the eye blink pattern actually indicates when stress and anxiety is kind of going through the roof. Likewise, continuing to look at body sensors, you know, you sort of mentioned Tracy Weston's work in the beginning focused on trying to recognize stimming. Now, the sensors have improved so much that we can now get all kinds of things. So there's thin and ergonomic stuff that's carried under the clothing, pattern recognition algorithms that can look not only for things like stimming, but other kinds of physical activities. And we just did a study last summer where we can detect fidgeting in ADHD kids using just a Fitbit. So it's a pretty simple thing. We stick it right on their back. It's not nearly as intrusive as a whole bunch of these other sensors. So the platforms are getting more and more easy to use. And then here's Matthew's work again. This is pretty intensive, but this is actually something that you could wear in your daily life. You probably wouldn't wear it every day, but you could wear it for like a week if you really wanted to understand in depth what's going on physiologically around perhaps particular interventions, or if you know that a particular time of day is really stressful and you're trying to understand what's going on in the body physiologically, these kinds of sensors are now available to get all of this stuff at once. Okay, and then on the environmental side, an example for you here is about sensory therapy. So what we see in sort of best practices in the autism world is to create these really expensive, really elaborate sensory processing rooms that are all about these multi-sensory environments. They're all about things like, you know, we've got mirrors here, and bouncy balls, and different kinds of textures and fabrics and music and lights and all kinds of things in these rooms. And this is just about impossible to implement at home. And so there's thought about, okay, well, can we bring some of that environment into the home using technology? So Kate Ringlin one of my students has been working on a video game-based system that uses the Kinect for off-the-shelf, so it's sort of off-the-shelf hardware for these body-based interactions, so that instead of actually having a therapist have to hand you a ball and you are then being asked to sort of move it or do these different body motions, instead we have the interface ask you to paint or to color in something. And they can hold up the same ball and have the same experience, but the Kinect game is actually asking them to do it as opposed to a therapist, which makes it way easier to move into the home. And we just recently tested this, and I won't go into all the details of it, but I do want to show you a video of kids using it because videos are fun. This is in cooperation with our friends down in Sisese and Ensenada, so you're going to hear Spanish in the background. Those of you who speak Spanish, enjoy. And what you see there is they're getting a mirror of their shadow so that it helps them understand where their body is in motion and while they're painting. This particular kid really loved throwing the balls and making the paint splat. And then you can see the therapist is also involved, so it supports multiple people at one time. All right, so that gives you an idea. And the nice thing about Kinect, you guys have all played Kinect, I'm assuming? Yes? You've seen it at some point? The nice thing about Kinect, right, is for kids who might have fine motor challenges, right, holding a remote or something is hard, but Kinect-based games allow them to engage without having to actually hold anything. Okay, so from human-directed to really more human-assisted. What we mean here, a good example of this is gaming. How many of you game? Half, all right. Less than I expected, but okay. We do see heavy video game use well, really in everyone, but particularly in sort of the autism and neurodevelopmental disorders population. So that includes ADHD and a bunch of other things. At the same time, there's really extensive time demands for behavioral therapy. There are some people who recommend that people with autism get at least 40 hours of behavioral therapy a week. That's in addition to school. So you can imagine that's pretty hard, and it's nearly impossible for families to be able to afford and to be able to do all this time-wise and so on. So we see games as a way to actually shrink that therapy gap a little bit. So one example of this is work that's going on at the University of Washington, and also there's a startup out of this. The idea is this GoGo for expressive language. So what we see here is that the best predictor of long-term outcomes for kids with autism is speech therapy. Speech therapy is really expensive, really hard to get a hold of. I mean, speech therapists are in massive demand. There's a huge shortage of them. Most families are probably getting a couple hours of speech therapy a week. And we see that speech therapy is actually a place that's really well matched for software. And this isn't just creating technologies that speak for the children, although that's important as well, augmentative communication and so on, but this is also about creating therapies that encourage the kids to speak for themselves. So the GoGo Game Suite, which you can download on iTunes if you would like, has these 3 different games. They're sort of mini games is what they call them. And it's all about things like labeling, questioning, having shared attention. All of these are traditional goals of speech and language therapy, but translated into the iPad form factor. So for example, in this game, you're trying to say, eventually you're trying to get to saying green bubble with a green monster, and it progresses you through the stages. So once you've mastered sort of saying ba and then bubble, and on it goes, right? And that's the general sort of way that works. This other game, hide and seek, now the monsters are free from their bubbles and they have to make their escape. So it's going to ask you to say different, to respond to different questions. And again, you can see it's voice controlled, so it's trying to interpret what you're saying. And then joint attention. Joint attention is all about sort of if I point to something, you guys are all pretty much naturally going to go look at what I'm pointing to. That's actually a skill you developed as very young children. And this is about trying to encourage that. So again, these monsters are, playing around, things are floating by, the interface is going to ask you to identify the different things, and you and the monsters focus on them together. Okay, another game, Zodi's World. This is developed here, not by UCI, but by other people in Orange County, and then we're doing some empirical work in evaluating Zodi's World. You can also download it from iTunes. Again, has a mini game concept. So there's these different games, and this set of games is all about teaching social skills. So there's this treasure hunt that requires I have to push my little finger down, and my partner has to push their finger down before the interface will work. The dragon fireball. Anybody ever play Pong? Now I get to see who's old. It's very much the idea is Pong, right? I'm on this side of the iPad, my partner's on this side of the iPad, and we're working together to try to defeat this dragon who's swirling, fireballs at us, and we're throwing ice balls at him. The maze. I can control, to the right and down. My partner controls to the left and up, and we have to move through this maze. These are the kinds of ideas. So it's very much the idea that you have to work together in a pretty small form factor because it's an iPad, which is deeply uncomfortable for some of the kids that we're having play this game. But that teaches a whole bunch of different kinds of social skills. And no, it's not, I don't think it's as good as therapy, right? It's probably not as good as human-based therapy, but it's really appealing to kids because they want to play these games, and you can say, hey, go play with your brother on this iPad game while I make dinner. That's more appealing than like going and playing Angry Birds, which is probably teaching them nothing, right? So that's kind of the role that we see games doing, is bridging some of that gap, but not replacing the human therapy. Okay. So this is where I get to be a little bit snarky. This is the sort of way that things look in the autism space. There's millions of apps, so I'm just picking on a few. We see ones that are really ugly and have no empirical evidence, but sell like crazy. This done yes, no button is like, parents love this thing. All it is, literally, I'm not kidding, is a big green button that when you push it says yes, and a big red button that when you push it says no. Now, if you have a nonverbal child, that's pretty useful. It's so ugly it will make you want to cry, and there's no empirical evidence behind it other than sort of common sense, right? But this is a big part of the autism space in terms of technologies. We also have a whole bunch of really high quality UIs. I actually love the Social Express. I think it's nice that no one's ever validated whether or not these things actually work. We think they work. Anecdotally, they seem to work. They're beautiful, but we don't really know. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that does have really nice empirical evidence. ProLiquid Go is a couple $100, but well worth it in terms of augmentative communication. So ugly, so impossible to use that you have to get specially trained to even be able to program this thing to be able to use it. And then you have what we hope is sort of this sweet spot. And this is, I only put Zodi's World and GoGo in here, but there are other things that go in here. Again, these are just exemplars, but things that we think are well designed, and we're also really trying to put empirical evidence behind and actually testing whether or not these things work. And so unfortunately what you see is a lot of media hype about this whole space, and a very small percentage of things that actually fit into this quadrant, and this is what we're trying to fix. So, moving forward, what does that mean? No doubt tech innovation happens through community research and business partnerships. This is absolutely true in the autism space as well. And so you guys probably already know that, but it's one thing I really want to drill home, right? You're not going to sit in the corner somewhere and just create some amazing piece of technology that's going to change the world. A few people have done this. They are very few. The vast majority of people who are making really nice things are doing it through these nice community partnerships and trying to understand what the larger space is. This requires sort of long-term engagement, meaningful collaborations. The things that you guys are doing through this program fit into that, right? You're laying the framework and laying the foundation for being able to do these kinds of things over a long period of time if you want to. And technology provides a lot of options, but it also brings a lot of challenges with it, and we see this for sure in the autism space. Any parent who's ever had an iPad winged at their head can tell you that the iPad is not the silver bullet that the media would have you believe it is. And that's why we believe that the empirical study of these new products is so important and so key. Okay, I wanted to end with a little bit of advice for you guys. So, hopefully for some of you, what I just talked about makes you excited. That's awesome. Come see me later. You can do research with me. But for most of you, probably it's not your thing. So go find the thing that makes you super excited, because you only get to do this one time. And research is hard, so do something that you care about. And once you've found that thing, go enroll in 198H if you're doing the honors program, or 199, and take it seriously and really do what makes you excited. I wish I had done more research when I was an undergrad. And then when you're all done here, go do it for real, right? We get to play a little, and especially with our undergrad projects, I often use these as opportunities to play in some space that I don't have to produce results, but it's nice if I can. But eventually you'll get to where you really want to do something you have to do. You have to produce those results, and go do that, whether it's in industry or grad school or wherever you want to do it. Okay, I can answer questions. If you want to learn more about what we're doing with autism technology, you can check out this website, which is very much a work in progress. I try to tweet about interesting things in the autism tech world here. I don't know what the heck I tweet about here. And you can always email me. That's it.